Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've been running my little corner store on Main Street for over 20 years now. It's a quaint place, but we've got all the essentials: bread, milk, eggs, some snacks, and canned goods. I know most of my regulars by name, and we always exchange friendly hellos. It's the kind of shop where people stop to chat while picking up their groceries. A real community staple. That welcoming spirit changed the day Karen walked in. Even her first visit rubbed me the wrong way. She had an entitled air about her, walking with her nose in the air. Without so much as a greeting, she snatched up an armful of items, dropping some on the floor in her haste. At the register, she huffed and puffed dramatically while I rang up her purchases. Not a single please or thank you crossed her lips. I hoped that would be the last I saw of her, but Karen's visits became a regular nuisance. Each time her rude behavior escalated, she barked orders, complaining items were incorrectly shelved or expired. The price of milk was too high in her opinion, which she voiced loudly to any customer in earshot. Karen's shrieking tones gave me a pounding headache. Most egregious was her brazen shoplifting. She'd slip small items into her purse stealthily while browsing. A candy bar here, a bag of chips there. If I confronted her, she'd insist it was already her property. One day I caught her shoving a bottle of expensive whiskey into her bag. That was the last straw. "Ma'am, I saw you put that in your purse. You need to pay for that," I stated firmly. Karen's face turned red with indignation. "How dare you? I brought this from home. I don't appreciate false accusations." Her voice rose to a shout that startled nearby shoppers. I stayed calm, but unyielding. "I have security cameras. We can review the footage together." At that, Karen grabbed her phone in a huff. "You're despicable! I'm calling the police on you this instant for harassment over nothing." I simply crossed my arms. "Feel free. We can show them the recordings when they arrive." Within 10 minutes, 2 officers entered the store. One approached me while the other spoke to Karen, who was still fuming. "What seems to be the problem here?" the officer asked me. I explained about catching Karen stealing and her aggressive reaction. The officer nodded and said they would need to see the security footage. I was more than happy to oblige. The 4 of us gathered in my back office to review the tapes. Karen fidgeted nervously in her seat as the video clearly showed her slipping items into her bag without paying. The whiskey bottle was unmistakable. Karen's face drained of color. "Ma'am, the evidence is quite clear. You'll need to return the stolen merchandise immediately," the officer told her firmly. Karen sputtered excuses about forgetting her wallet and mistaking the bottle for her own, but her pathetic lies didn't sway the officers who escorted her to the front to return each purloined item from her purse. Lip curled in anger, Karen shoved the heap of products at me. "We'll be issuing you a citation for shoplifting today," the officer informed her. "Any further incidents will result in arrest." Karen glanced around, realizing all eyes were on her. "You haven't heard the last of this! I'll have your job for this mistreatment!" she yelled at me before storming out. I sighed in relief once the commotion ended and thanked the officers profusely. I knew Karen would likely remain a thorn in my side, but at least I'd taken a stand against her bullying behavior. In the following days, I made sure our security system was in top shape. Sure enough, Karen returned soon after, up to her old tricks. She had the audacity to grab a bottle of wine in plain view of the cashier, shoving it into her bag casually while staring him down with a daring glare. The cashier immediately fetched me from the stockroom. "Karen's at it again," he said nervously. "I'll handle it," I assured him. I approached Karen with calm resolve. "We caught you on camera stealing again. I'm afraid I'll need to call the police per their warning." Karen's smug expression melted, replaced by indignant fury. "I don't know what kind of con you're trying to pull, you crook!" she yelled loudly. "I'm calling the cops on you for harassing your customers." I held up a hand. "Feel free. Let's allow the officers to review our security footage again and determine where the harassment is coming from." When the police arrived, Karen quickly spun her tale of false accusations against her. "This man is out to get me for no reason at all. I'm just a paying customer." The officer patiently listened before asking to see the recordings. Again, the video plainly revealed Karen slipping the bottle into her overflowing bag. "Ma'am, you were informed last time that another shoplifting offense would lead to arrest," the officer said. "I'm afraid you'll have to come to the station with me." Karen's shrill protests echoed through the store as the cuffs were slapped on. I almost felt sorry witnessing her meltdown with the smug entitlement wiped clean off her face. But when I recalled all the harassment she'd put me through, my sympathy faded. With Karen sitting sulkily in the back of the squad car, the officer thanked me for alerting them. "Looks like she won't be troubling you anymore," he said. I certainly hoped that was true. At the trial, Karen maintained her innocence, claiming I had it out for her as a paying customer. But the unwavering video evidence spoke for itself. Once the judge sentenced her with fines and a restraining order banning her from my store, Karen finally cracked. "You'll live to regret this," she yelled as bailiffs dragged her from the courtroom. "Your store is finished." However, in the weeks since Karen's arrest, business is booming. Several regulars congratulated me for standing up to her bullying. Turns out most customers had felt on edge whenever she stopped by. Now the calm, friendly atmosphere has returned, so while part of me wonders if Karen will retaliate somehow, I know I don't regret my actions. The justice system dealt with her appropriately, and I can finally refocus on running my store in peace, getting back to what matters most, serving my wonderful community. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I'm not sure if this is pro or not, but I got revenge on a douchebag I used to volunteer firefight with. This was in the early/mid-2000s. I decided to join the local fire department as a volunteer firefighter. I did it for about 5 years and it was great. Training consisted of 3 months of fire training, 2 nights a week and all-day Saturday, and then you would go to EMT training, another 3 months of training. I was about a year in when I was asked to help train some new recruits. One of the lieutenants, Amy, was a short middle-aged woman who was so full of fire she could make a grown man cry. She was one of those people who commanded both fear and respect wherever she went. Honestly, a great lieutenant and a great person. When she wasn't being a drill sergeant, she was extremely kind and generous. She would often bake cakes and treats for people and deliver them to the various stations in our department. However, in this new academy class that I was asked to help with, there was a cocky kid that we will call Aaron. Aaron talked big during the training and acted like he was the all-American hero, as if he was going to be the lead badass in Backdraft 2. He performed moderately well in training, but far from the top of the class. He got assigned to Amy's station, which was a pretty quiet station in the department. A few months after he started, Amy swung by my station one night to say hi. She brought us the motherlode cake from Claim Jumper, a massive 6-layer cake. She explained that she had treated her crew to a night out at Claim Jumper, which must have cost a lot of money. I think she took out about 8 people and bought a whole cake to top it all off. They had eaten the first 2 layers, so she gave us the remaining 4. We thanked her profusely and she left. Back then, the big social media platform was MySpace, and I decided to look up some of the people in the department to make friends. I came across Aaron's page, and I noticed some photos of him and the rest of his crew at Claim Jumper with Amy. However, when I read the comments, he bragged about how he had purposefully ordered the most expensive dinner, appetizers, and drinks since Amy was buying. He bragged about how he was going to take advantage of her stupidity. This alone pissed me off because she was doing this super nice and generous thing. What an ungrateful, selfish jerk. Then I read the rest of his profile. He had videos and memes on his page glorifying himself as a badass firefighter, bragging about running into burning buildings and how he was such a hero. He was flirting with girls, blatantly trying to impress them with how brave he was. Bear in mind, he had just graduated from the academy 3 months prior and hadn't even gone to EMT school. He had never been to a house fire, and all he basically did was carry gear for the other fully qualified firefighters. It was too much for me to tolerate. So here is the revenge. I printed off copies of his MySpace page, including his comments about Amy and toxic bragging. I made multiple copies and took them to every station in the department. We all had pagers, God, I'm old, and a small keyboard at each station to send out text messages. I made an anonymous all-staff page and sent his MySpace info to everyone in the department. I had to keep it brief since I couldn't fit a ton of characters, but I sent out his MySpace info and told everyone about how he treated Amy. Within an hour, Aaron had cleared out his MySpace page of all posts, photos, etc. A couple of days later, he deleted his account. It's a good thing I made so many copies. Immediately after this happened, he stopped coming to volunteer, and a few weeks later I heard that he had quit. I later talked to Amy and admitted I was the one who sent the page. I told her I hated how he treated her and she thanked me. She seemed really sad and hurt by what he had done. But being the tough, short lady that she was, she quickly got back into being an actual badass firefighter. She later started dating and married a fire chief who also helped at the academy. I've lost touch with her, but I hope she did well. She seemed pretty happy the last time I saw her. The next one is a petty revenge story. This isn't my petty revenge story, but my grandpa's. About 15 or more years ago, my grandparents retired and moved to a gated community a couple of blocks from a decent-sized lake. Their house was near Lake Athens, Texas. My grandpa absolutely loves to get out of the house and fish, so retiring close to a lake was an absolute godsend for him. I remember going out on the lake and fishing with him multiple times growing up. He had a tracker boat that he would tow with his old 80-ish Chevy truck. Now, just so you know, this wasn't his daily driver. He used it strictly for towing his boat. When not in use, he would park it in a little alcove a few feet away from his driveway, surrounded by trees. Appearance-wise, this truck was not beautiful and had definitely seen better days, but it was still more than capable of taking his boat to and from the lake with no problems at all. Fast forward a few months, and he receives a letter from his next-door neighbor. It turns out, they hate seeing his old truck, despite it being pretty well covered by trees, and believe it ruins their enjoyment of looking outside their house. In the letter, they have stated that they have contacted the Homeowners Association multiple times with the goal of either fining him until he sells his truck or removes it completely from their view. My grandpa was pissed. He called his Homeowners Association to discuss the letter, and it turns out the Homeowners Association has shut down all of the neighbors' complaints, but they are persistent and keep sending more. Now here comes the revenge. My grandpa then asks if there would be any repercussions from chopping down a few trees on his property, the trees that oh-so kept his Chevy moderately hidden from his pesky neighbor's peeping eyes. He gets the all clear and begins chopping away. His old beat-up Chevy that was once covered ever so carefully by the trees was now displayed bare in its entirety for the whole world to see. Needless to say, the Grinches next door were not happy to see his truck uncensored. From what I remember, they tried to complain again before deciding to move away. You must have a pretty pathetic life if the sight of someone's old truck is enough to make you pack up and leave. The next one is a malicious compliance story. About a decade ago, while I was waiting for my current department to hire, I took a job with a private EMS company as an EMTI on a fast response motorcycle unit, contracted out to our local Freeway agency for accident response. It was an okay gig. Long hours and riding 300-plus kilometers every day killed my love of biking, but it beat the hell out of working on an ambulance. The same agency also staffed pickups with safety crews for the purpose of lane closures and scene safety. While we were a quasi-governmental unit, we had no real authority outside of that allowed to us by the Fire Brigade Services Act, and often had motorists ignore our suggestions when it came to not driving through accident scenes. This meant that police units still had to deal with offenders occasionally, and it was usually quite fun to watch. I had the pleasure of working on the same stretch of Freeway as a certain Metro Police motor unit, and I watched him mess with people a few times. Two specific instances come to mind. The first time I saw this salty old bugger use his powers of shithousery was after a multi-vehicle pileup just after an aggressive bend in the freeway that closed down 3 of the 4 lanes of traffic, causing a line of cars that stretched for a few kilometers back around the bend. This meant that cars at the rear couldn't see what was causing the delay up front. A number of drivers decided that they were too important to wait and drove up the hard shoulder, half on the road and half on the grass, to mosey on by the accident scene, leaving the law-abiding drivers to sit in the hot sun, looking at us with dismay. After a few of them snuck by, nearly hitting crews who were busy treating patients and almost taking out a recovery vehicle, this absolute stud of a man got fed up and moved his bike into the shoulder, but in such a way that they weren't able to see him. Every car he stopped got told to park up and wait while he waited for his next victim. After he'd collected a gaggle of about 20 of them, he slowly made his way up the line, ticket book in hand, to have an unhurried chat with each driver individually. Not only did I get to watch each idiot eat an almighty fine for leaving the roadway and ignoring emergency vehicles, they also had the pleasure of sitting there as the scene was cleared before being allowed back into traffic, turning a 20-minute delay into nearly an hour of baking in the noonday sun. There was much gnashing of teeth and mutterings of, "Don't you have anything better to do, officer?" While that was pretty funny to me, the best I saw of him was a few months later when we got a call for a scrap metal hauler that was quite impressively overloaded and had managed to roll over while on the two-lane overpass connecting the same national freeway to the city freeway that led into the industrial area south of the city center. This thing must have been pushing 40,000 kilograms when it wedged itself, nose against the right-hand concrete barrier and tail digging a deep gouge into the counterpart barrier on the left. This meant that there wasn't a hair's breadth on either side of the truck, and traffic was diverted at the entrance to the overpass, around 500 meters up from the scene. I didn't technically need to be there at this point, as the driver had been taken to the hospital, and the road was closed awaiting the arrival of 2 heavy rigs to lift and recover the truck and contents. I was leaning on my Suzuki, perving over this officer's BMW R1200 RT, when we noticed that the crew of the safety unit at the closure was having difficulty with a vehicle that seemed to think they were above the law, and was aggressively trying to get by the pickup, cones, and angry men in reflective gear. Seeing this and the potential for injury, he told them to wave the car through. As it zoomed down and then up to us on the top of the overpass, he winked at me. When they stopped behind the very heavy and very wedged truck, he wandered over to have a chat with the driver, who was apparently the spokeswoman for the 4-strong irritation of Karens within. The crux of his chat with her was that he certainly understood their point about needing to get to their highly important destination, but that the road they had elected to use was currently blocked by 40 tons of mangled steel, and he was sure they would agree it would be dangerous for her to drive back against the traffic, considering that we had heavy rigs and support vehicles arriving and setting up. He apologized for the inconvenience, but directed them to park up by our bikes and wait for the rigs to do their thing, after which we could all be on our merry way. It took about an hour to get the road clear, after which they most definitely weren't making eye contact and appeared like beaten dogs as he finally wished them safe travels on their way. The next one is an entitled People Story. So my wife Zena and I made reservations for a very nice restaurant that opened up in January. However, due to it being posh, new, and apparently having excellent food, my wife and I had to wait until last week in order to get a spot there. So we got a babysitter and a nurse for my granny-in-law and got all dolled up to go. We took my wife's car, and since it was brand new, she didn't want anyone but herself to drive it, so she dropped me off at the door and went to park the car. Now it's important to note that we did call earlier and confirm the reservation. So the host was there. Now I am well dressed up. A nice suit, nice haircut, clean shaven, and nice shoes, looking like a man of culture, and not as the tradesman I normally am. I guess at this point I should mention that I'm not fully white. I'm Irish-American on my dad's side, but more importantly, I am also half Cuban, which comes from my mom's side. While I do mostly look like my father, I have darker skin, brown eyes, and black hair like my mother's side of the family. From the way the host looked at me, I just knew this was going to be a problem. He had the face of a man that was witnessing a dog taking a dump on the carpet and scrunched his nose like he was smelling its crap. I was thinking I should wait for my wife, since the reservation was under both of our names, but he spoke first. Entitled Host, EEH. Can I help you? His tone clearly stated that he didn't even want to look at me. Me, while trying to pretend not to notice. Yes, there is a reservation under Phil and Zena, last names. The EH looked at the list. He was clearly not really reading it. EH. No, I don't see your names here. Now, I've experienced this sort of crap my entire life, so I try to remain as polite and professional as possible. Me. Check again. My wife called and confirmed the reservation. He checks again, shaking his head. EH. No, there is no one here under that name. Perhaps you and your wife are at the wrong restaurant? Yeah, I knew arguing with this guy was going to get me nowhere, so I just wished him a good evening, turned around and walked right outside. Zena was just about to enter the building as I was coming out. Zena, what's the matter? So I explained about how racism was being a pain again, and she sighed. Zena sighed. What do you want to do? Me. Well, we got the reservation and a night to ourselves. I want to try the food here, and I refuse to let that snot get in the way of that. So you go in, confirm the reservation, and then I'll come in. I hate to say it, but it's a tactic we had to use in the past to get into restaurants. Edit. I should mention that my wife is white, hence why we did this. In most cases, it's just the host that gives us the problems. If it's the service as a whole, we would leave and leave a poor review. Still, it's fun in a way. It's still fun to see my wife go in, get us our table, and then me walking in to sit with her. The host looked like he swallowed something really sour as I sat down across from my wife. I half expected him to say something, but he just turned his head away. The service was lovely. The waiter we had was polite and quick, and the food was wonderful. But every so often, the EH would look over at us and just frown. I saw him turn away 2 more couples that weren't up to his standards. Well, our evening was still wonderful. Despite the nasty looks we got, we still enjoyed our food. Of course, my wife called the owners and let them know what the host did and tried to do to us. She let the owners know that she will not tolerate such intolerance from a man that was turning away business. She added that such a host would eventually cause the restaurant to get a terrible reputation, and they would get into a lot of trouble over it. Well, 1 week later, I was talking to some neighbors and found out that the EH was no longer working there. Rumor has it that he turned away over 200 inches customers, not sure if it was true or not, and got fired over this. They hired someone that was much nicer, though Zena and I wouldn't find out until November when we go back again. Still, it's not the first time nor the last time that this will happen to me. Yet, it's still nice to see racist people like that getting wrecked in the end. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.